Standing in my father's mahogany-paneled office, I watched my brother Sterling's smug face as the lawyer read, "Dad's will." The room smelled like old leather and disappointment, the same combination that had filled every family gathering for the past 20 years. Sterling sat there in his $3,000 suit, manicured fingers drumming against the antique desk that would soon be his, along with everything else that mattered in the Reeves family empire. To my eldest son, Sterling Reeves, hello friends. Before we dive into today's story, please help me grow this channel by subscribing, sharing this video with others, and don't forget to hit that like button. Now, let's get started with our story. Mitchell Granger's voice cut through the silence like a judge delivering a verdict. I leave my entire real estate portfolio, including all commercial properties, rental units, and development projects valued at $41 million. Sterling didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. He adjusted his Rolex, the same gold watch Dad had worn to every business meeting, and let out a small chuckle that he masked as a cough. Mom shifted in her chair, her hands folded so tight her knuckles went white. Uncle Juan stood by the window, his weathered face turned away from all of us, studying the parking lot below like it held the secrets of the universe. And to my son Colton Reeves, the lawyer continued, pushing his glasses up his nose like he needed to make sure he was reading this right. I leave the Sea Dreams, my 1987 Boston whaler fishing boat, currently moored at Bayside Marina, slip number 7. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the fluorescent lights humming above us. Sterling's chair creaked as he leaned back, and then he burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle, not a nervous giggle, but a full-throated laugh that filled every corner of that office. At least the loser gets something, right, Colt? He turned to face me, his eyes bright with victory. Maybe you can catch dinner with it. God knows you'll need to save money now. The lawyer cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in his presence. There are no other provisions or codicils to the will, Mr. Vernon. Reeves was quite specific about the distribution of assets, $41 million versus maybe $8,000 on a good day if someone was drunk, enough to buy that rust bucket. The math was so absurd it felt like a joke, except nobody else was laughing. My daughter Penny, 16 and fiercer than any lawyer in that room, stood up from her chair in the corner. Grandpa always said the value of something isn't in what it costs, she said, her voice steady and clear. He said it's in what it means. Sterling snorted. Well then, that boat must mean Colton gets to stay exactly where he's always been, at the bottom. But what nobody knew, not Sterling with his Harvard MBA, not the lawyer with his 40 years of experience, not even Mom who'd been married to Vernon Reeves for 45 years, was that Dad never did anything without a reason. Vernon Reeves was a man who planned his lunch orders a week in advance, who had backup plans for his backup plans, who once spent 6 months researching the best brand of paper clips for his office, and that rusted, forgotten fishing boat sitting in a marina across town would teach me the most valuable lesson of my life. Sometimes the smallest gifts carry the biggest secrets, and sometimes a father's love isn't measured in millions, but in the trust to find what's hidden beneath the surface. My name is Colton Reeves, I'm 38 years old, and this is the story of how I inherited a fishing boat worth $8,000 and discovered I was never my father's son at all. I was something much more valuable. I was his partner. My name is Colton Reeves, and for 38 years I lived in my older brother's shadow. Not the kind of shadow that provides cool relief on a hot day, but the kind that blocks out the sun entirely, leaving everything beneath it struggling to grow. While Sterling went to Harvard Business School and joined Dad's real estate empire straight after graduation, I chose construction work. I chose calloused hands over manicured nails, hard hats over Harvard ties, and concrete foundations over corporate foundations. Honest work, Dad called it, whenever someone asked about his youngest son's career choice, though his tone always carried a note of explanation rather than pride, like he was justifying why Vernon Reeves, the man who built an empire from a single rental property, had a son who worked for hourly wages plus overtime. Vernon Reeves was a legend in our town. Started with nothing in 1975. Just a broken-down duplex he bought at a foreclosure auction for $12,000. He fixed it up himself, working nights and weekends while keeping his day job at the lumber yard. By the time I was born in 1986, he owned 30 properties. By the time I graduated high school, He owned 200 commercial buildings across 3 states. The Reeves name was on office complexes, shopping centers, and apartment buildings from Pennsylvania to Georgia. Growing up in that house was like being an understudy in a play where the lead role was already permanently cast. Sterling was 4 years older and 40 years smarter, at least according to the report cards Mom used to hang on the refrigerator. His were always on top, mine buried somewhere, beneath grocery lists and dentist appointment reminders. "Look, at your brother closing that mall deal," Dad would announce at dinner, sliding a newspaper across the table with Sterling's photo in the business section. 26 years old and already managing 10 properties. That's forward thinking. That's vision. Meanwhile, I was laying foundation concrete for other people's dreams, coming home covered in dust and exhaustion, while Sterling came home counting commissions and collecting congratulations. I'd wash the concrete from under my fingernails while he polished his cufflinks. I'd ice my sore back while he celebrated another acquisition at the country club. The thing is, I wasn't bitter about it. Not really. I loved my work. There's something pure about construction, something real. When you pour a foundation, it either holds or it doesn't. There's no spinning it. No marketing angle, no creative accounting, just truth measured in load-bearing capacity and structural integrity. My daughter Penny understood this better than anyone in the family. She'd been my compass since the day she was born. 2 weeks after her mother decided that being married to a construction worker wasn't the fairy tale she'd signed up for. Penny stayed with me every other week, and those were the weeks that mattered. "Dad, you build things that last," Penny would say when she'd catch me staring at Sterling's latest newspaper mention. "Uncle, Sterling just shuffles papers. Anyone can sell something that already exists. You create something from nothing." But even Penny couldn't hide her confusion when we attended the will reading. 2 weeks after Dad's funeral, the cancer had taken him. Faster than anyone expected. 1 month he was closing deals. The next he was closing his eyes for the last time. Sterling had handled all the arrangements, of course, turning Dad's funeral into what felt like a networking event for his real estate associates. Mom sat quietly in the corner of the lawyer's office that day, tissues in hand, her black dress making her look smaller than her 67 years. "Your father had his reasons for everything," she whispered to me before Mitchell Granger started reading. "Even when we didn't understand them, he always had his reasons." Uncle Juan stood by the window, his weathered face unreadable. He and Dad had started the business together back in the 70s, 2 brothers with nothing but ambition and a shared toolbox. Then something happened in the early 90s that nobody in the family talked about. One day, Juan was vice president of Reeves Development. The next day, he was gone, starting his own small contracting firm on the other side of town. He still came to family gatherings, still sent Christmas cards, but there was always a weight in the air between him and Dad, like a conversation that needed to happen, but never would. Vernon was very specific about the distribution, Mitchell Granger had said, adjusting his glasses and organizing the papers in front of him like he was preparing for battle. "There are no provisions for contestation. What I'm about to read is final and legally binding." The office felt smaller suddenly, like all the oxygen had been sucked out and replaced with expectation. Sterling leaned forward in his chair, already calculating interest rates and investment opportunities. I sat there in my only suit, the one I'd worn to my high school graduation, wondering why Dad had insisted I attend this meeting at all. The humiliation burned worse than any construction site injury I'd ever suffered. I'd been hit by falling beams, had concrete burned through my work gloves, even broke 3 ribs when scaffolding collapsed on a job site in Pittsburgh. But nothing compared to the pain of sitting in that office watching $41 million go to Sterling, while I got a boat worth maybe $8,000 on a good day if the buyer was feeling generous and slightly drunk. Sterling couldn't contain his satisfaction. He stood up from his chair, walked over to where I sat, and put his hand on my shoulder with fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Hey, Colt, if you need money for gas, just ask. Family helps family, right? I mean, that boat probably hasn't run in years, but I'm sure we can get it moving. Maybe you can start a little fishing charter business. I could even give you a small loan to get started." Mitchell Granger shuffled his papers uncomfortably. "If there are no questions about the distribution of assets, We can proceed to the signing of documents. No questions here, Sterling said, already pulling out his Mont Blanc pen. Everything seems perfectly clear. Dad knew what he was doing. The next morning I drove to Bayside Marina, where Dad kept the Sea Dreams. The security guard at the gate looked at me with something between pity and confusion when I told him I was there to see my inheritance. "Slip 7?" he said, pointing down the dock. "Though I got to tell you, your daddy hasn't taken that boat out in probably 5 years. Just sits there." She sat at the end of the dock like a forgotten memory, paint peeling off her hull in sheets, bird droppings decorating her deck like polka dots of humiliation. The Sea Dreams was a 28-foot Boston whaler from 1987, and she looked every one of her 38 years. The vinyl seats were cracked and faded from sun exposure. The engine compartment was probably a rust museum. Even the dock lines looked embarrassed. To be holding her, Harold, the marina manager, walked over with a cup of coffee and a sympathetic expression. He was in his 60s, had probably seen 1,000 boats and 1,000 family dramas play out on these docks. "Your daddy loved that boat," he said, leaning against a piling. "Came here every Sunday morning until his health went bad about a year ago. Strange thing, though, never took her out. Just sat in the cabin for hours, sometimes writing in a notebook, sometimes just staring at the water, probably hiding from Sterling's real estate presentations," I muttered, climbing aboard and feeling the deck give slightly under my weight. "Your brother was here yesterday," Harold mentioned casually. "Took photos of the boat. Said something about helping you list it for sale. Even offered to buy it himself for 10 grand. Said he'd turn it into a planter for one of his commercial properties." The thought of Sterling turning Dad's boat into a decoration for some strip mall made my stomach turn. That night, Mom called while I was sitting in my kitchen staring at the ownership papers for the Sea Dreams. "Colton, don't be bitter," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Your father saw something in you that maybe you don't see in yourself." "Yeah, he saw someone worth $8,000. The message is pretty clear. Mom, that boat meant everything to him. Before the business took off. Before the money changed everything. He bought that boat with his first real paycheck from the lumberyard. Said it represented freedom. Possibility. He used to take you out on it when you were little, before Sterling got too busy with his advanced placement classes and summer internships. I didn't remember those trips, or maybe I'd forced myself to forget them, along with every other memory from before Sterling became the crown prince of the Reeves Empire. Sterling texted me a photo that evening. He was sitting in Dad's former office, feet up on the desk, holding a bottle of champagne. The caption read, "Heavy is the head that wears the crown, but someone's got to do it. Let me know when you want to sell the boat. Offer stands at 10 grand. Penny found me in the garage later that night, going through boxes of Dad's old photos and papers looking for something. Anything that might explain why he'd done this to me. You going to sell it?" she asked, sitting down beside me on the concrete floor. "The boat? Might as well. Need to fix the truck transmission anyway, and Sterling's offer would cover it with some leftover." She picked up a photo of Dad standing on the Sea Dreams, holding a younger version of me, both of us smiling, like we'd just discovered treasure, Grandpa. Never did anything without thinking it through 10 times. "Remember when he gave me that old compass for my 10th birthday? Everyone thought it was junk, just some tarnished brass thing. Turned out it belonged to his father in World War II. Helped navigate a bomber through 37 missions." He said, "Sometimes the smallest gifts carry the biggest stories." 3 days later, I decided to take the Sea Dreams out one last time before listing it for sale. Something about selling it without ever taking it on the water felt wrong. Like throwing away a letter without reading it. I figured I owed Dad that much. One final voyage on the boat he'd kept for 30 years, even if I couldn't understand why. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of October day that made the marina look like a postcard. Harold helped me check the engine, and to my complete surprise, it turned over on the first try. "Your dad had me maintain it monthly," Harold explained, wiping his hands on a rag. "Paid 5 years in advance before he died. Full service package, including engine maintenance, hull cleaning, and system checks. 5 years for a boat he never used." Harold shrugged. But there was something in his eyes that suggested he knew more than he was saying. "Said you'd understand when the time came." Also said, "If you ever asked about selling it, I should tell you to check everything twice before making any decisions." I spent the morning going through that boat inch by inch, partly to assess its condition for sale, partly because I needed to understand what Dad had seen in this floating puzzle. The deck was solid despite its appearance. The navigation equipment was surprisingly modern, updated just 2 years ago, according to the installation dates. The cabin was small but meticulously clean, like someone had been maintaining a shrine. In the forward cabin behind the captain's chair, where Dad apparently spent his Sunday mornings, I noticed something odd about the wood paneling. There was a slight gap in the mahogany, barely visible unless you were looking for it. The wood was worn smooth around that spot, like someone had touched it repeatedly over many years. I pressed on it. Nothing happened. I tried sliding it. Still nothing. Then I noticed the captain's wheel had unusual wear marks at the full port position, like someone had cranked it hard left more times than normal navigation would require. On a hunch, I turned the wheel all the way to port until it stopped. A soft click echoed through the cabin. The panel popped open about an inch, revealing darkness behind it. My heart was pounding as I pulled it fully open, finding a hidden compartment about the size of a briefcase. Inside was a military-grade waterproof container, the kind Navy SEALs use for sensitive equipment, with a combination lock that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. The combination hit me immediately, like Dad was standing right there whispering it in my ear. Wait. March 18th, my birthday, not April 22nd. Sterling's birthday, not July 15th. Mom and Dad's anniversary, my birthday. My hands shook as I spun the numbers into place. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through my entire life. Inside the container were several manila envelopes, a stack of photographs, and a letter in Dad's unmistakable handwriting. The same careful script that had signed my report cards and birthday cards for 38 years. "Colton, if you're reading this, you've finally taken the helm." I sat down hard in the captain's chair, the same chair where Dad had spent countless Sunday mornings. The first envelope contained incorporation documents for something called Blackwater Holdings, LLC, dated 1992. The second held bank statements from an account I'd never heard of, with a balance that made my vision blur. 43 million. The third envelope was thicker, filled with contracts and agreements for infrastructure development projects across 6 states. As I read through them, a pattern emerged that made my chest tight. Every major construction project I'd worked on in the past 15 years was listed here. The overpass in Columbus, where I'd spent 6 months setting rebar. The parking complex in Charlotte, where I'd overseen the foundation work. The water treatment plant in Savannah, where I'd earned my reputation as one of the best concrete specialists in the Southeast. Blackwater Holdings had been a silent partner in every single one. There were photographs, to me at various job sites over the years, pictures I didn't know existed. In each one, there were small marks in the corner, notes in Dad's handwriting. Colton leading the Columbus team. Colton solving the drainage problem in Charlotte. Colton training the new guys in Savannah. He'd been watching, documenting, tracking every step of my career. At the bottom of the container was another envelope, this one marked with a single word. Truth. Inside were adoption papers from 1986, the year I was born. My biological father's name was listed as Juan Reeves, Uncle Juan, the man who'd stood silent at the window during the will reading, who'd left Dad's company in the early 90s, who'd watched Sterling inherit $41 million while I got a boat. Everything I thought I knew about my life rearranged itself in that moment, like pieces of a puzzle, finally showing their true picture. Dad's letter explained everything in his methodical way, each sentence carefully constructed like he was building a case in court. I could hear his voice in every word, that measured tone he used when explaining something important. "Son, the real estate empire was always meant for Sterling. He needs the spotlight, the recognition, the visible success that comes with having his name on buildings. He measures his worth in square footage and rent rolls, in newspaper mentions and country club conversations. That's who he is, and I've made peace with it. But you, Colton, you're like me before the money changed everything. You understand that real wealth isn't what people can see. It's what you build when nobody's watching. Blackwater Holdings is my real legacy. a silent partnership in infrastructure development across 6 states. Every major construction project you've worked on in the past 15 years, we owned a piece of it. You weren't just laying foundations. Son, you were building our empire brick by brick, beam by beam. While Sterling was taking photos for press releases, you were creating the skeleton that holds up half the Southeast development. The fishing boat wasn't an insult. It was a test. Would you honor my memory enough to take her out one last time? Would you care for something that seemed worthless? Sterling got what he could see. Buildings with our name on them. You're getting what matters. The invisible foundation that holds everything up. The company generates $8 million a year in passive income from infrastructure contracts. It's all yours now. The paperwork has been filed. You've been the sole beneficiary since the day you started working construction. There's more. Check the second envelope. The adoption papers stared back at me. Dated 2 months before my birth, the biological father's signature was there in fading blue ink. 1. Reeves, the adoptive father's signature below it. Vernon Reeves, my mother's signature on the side, agreeing to the arrangement. Another letter was tucked behind the papers. This, 1-in-1's rougher handwriting. Colton, your mother and I were young and stupid. I was 22, she was 19, and Vernon had already been married to her for 2 years. It happened. During that summer, Vernon was in the hospital with appendicitis, and we fell into something we couldn't take back. When you were conceived, Vernon had been unable to have children due to complications from his surgery. Your mother was devastated, ready to leave town, leave everything behind. But Vernon surprised us all. He said he'd raise you as his own. Said, every empire needs an heir, and blood didn't make family. Choice did. It was the hardest and best decision I ever made. Signing those papers. Vernon loved you more than you'll ever know. He saw in you what he saw in himself. Someone who builds real things, not just paper empires. The infrastructure business was his way of ensuring you'd always be taken care of, away from Sterling's jealousy and scrutiny. Sterling is my nephew, but he inherited the worst parts of the Reeves family pride. The need to be seen as superior. Vernon knew this. He protected you from it by keeping you separate from the visible business. Vernon was your father in every way that mattered, but I wanted you to know the truth. You weren't just his son, you were his chosen successor for what really mattered to him. I called Mom immediately, my voice cracking like I was 13 again. You knew? We all knew, honey. Her voice was calm, like she'd been preparing for this conversation for 38 years. Vernon insisted on raising you. He said the moment he held you in that hospital room, you became his son. Biology was just details. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because Vernon wanted you to grow up without the weight of that knowledge. He wanted you to become who you were meant to be, not who you thought you had to be. Every Sunday when he went to that boat, he was writing in his journal about your progress, about the man you were becoming. He kept copies of every construction report that mentioned your name, every safety commendation, every project you completed ahead of schedule. Sterling doesn't know. Sterling sees what he wants to see. He got the fortune he can count. You got the father's love that counts. I looked at the final document in the container. It was a transfer of ownership for Blackwater Holdings, dated a week before Dad died, officially making me the sole owner. There was a sticky note attached to it in Dad's shaky handwriting. His last words to me, "The boat is yours, son. She's not much to look at, but she holds the truth. Take care of what matters. Let Sterling have the spotlight. You keep the foundation strong. That's what real builders do." I kept the boat. Had it restored to pristine condition, not because I needed to, but because it represented something Sterling would never understand. The smallest gifts often carry the greatest love, and that 28-foot Boston whaler held more truth than Sterling's. $41 million worth of real estate ever. The restoration took 3 months. Did most of the work myself, replacing every board, every screw, every piece of hardware with my own hands. Harold helped when he could, sharing stories about Dad's Sunday morning visits. He'd sit in that captain's chair for hours. Harold told me one afternoon as we installed the new navigation system. Sometimes I'd bring him coffee, and he'd be writing in this leather journal, looking out at the water like he was seeing something nobody else could see. Now I understand what he was seeing. He was seeing you. At the marina, when the Sea Dreams was finally complete, painted navy blue with gold trim, just like in the old photos, Harold smiled and shook his head. Your daddy would be proud. You know, he told me once that real wealth isn't what people can see. It's what you build when nobody's watching. I thought he was talking about the boat. Turns out he was talking about you. I never told Sterling about Blackwater Holdings. Let him have his spotlight. His press releases about the Reeves real estate empire. His photos in the business section of the newspaper. Every month when he brags about his new acquisition at family dinners, I quietly smile, knowing that the parking garage underneath it belongs to Blackwater. The utility infrastructure supporting it belongs to me, the foundation. His empire stands on his mind, generating income he doesn't even know exists. Juan and I meet for coffee every Sunday now. Same diner on Route 47 where construction crews have been gathering since before I was born. Vernon raised you right. He says every week like he needs to keep confirming it. You could have revealed everything. Humiliated Sterling the way he humiliated you at that will reading. But you didn't. That's Vernon in you. Not me. I would have rubbed his face in it. Dad taught me that, I reply, stirring my black coffee the same way Vernon used to. The foundation doesn't need applause, it just needs to hold strong. Penny goes out on the boat with me sometimes, usually on Saturday mornings when the water is calm and the marina is quiet. Last week, she brought her boyfriend to meet me, a nervous kid named Timothy, who works at his father's hardware store. Sterling showed up uninvited in his new Ferrari, trying to impress the kid with talk of millions and markets, international deals, and investment portfolios. The boy looked at me after Sterling's 20-minute speech about wealth management and asked, "Mr. Reeves, what do you do?" Before I could answer, Penny spoke up, her voice carrying the same strength her grandfather's once did. My dad, he builds things that last. Everything else is just noise. That night, after everyone had left, I found another letter from Dad, hidden in the boat's navigation desk behind the GPS manual. It was dated just a week before he died, his handwriting shaky but determined. Colton, success isn't about what you inherit. It's about what you do with what seems worthless to others. The boat was never about the boat. It was about trust. I trusted you to look deeper, to value what others overlook, to find worth where others see waste. You were never my second son. You were my secret weapon. The real estate will make Sterling rich. The infrastructure company will make you wealthy. But this boat makes you my true heir because you understood its value when everyone else saw scrap metal and peeling paint. That's the difference between money and meaning, Sterling. Got the fortune, you got the future. I keep that letter in my wallet now, next to a photo of the Sea Dreams and a picture of Dad, holding me when I was 5, both of us wearing matching captain's hats that were too big for our heads. Sometimes, when Sterling calls to boast about his latest deal, I put him on speaker and take the boat out into the bay. The sound of the waves drowns out his voice. And I think about Dad, about Juan, about the choice to raise another man's son as his own, about love that runs deeper than blood. Vernon Reeves left Sterling $41 million in real estate that everyone could see and count. He left me a fishing boat worth $8,000 that held a $43 million secret. But more than that, hidden in that boat was proof that I wasn't just his son. I was his partner, his chosen one, his foundation. And that's worth more than all of Sterling's properties combined. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that true wealth isn't always visible, please hit that like button below. Share it with someone who needs to hear that. Their value isn't measured in dollars. Comment your thoughts on what real inheritance means to you, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that reveal life's hidden truths. Thank you for listening to my story.